Well, hello out there. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to have this fabulous panel with me today to talk about career trends for 2022, kind of what's going on right now and what is going to, we're going to expect for the rest of the year. So I'd like to ask my guests who, I've been friends with Lisa forever. I've been a fan of Hannah's for a long, long time. And I was so happy to meet Mark the beginning of last year and be on his show. That was my first LinkedIn Live. So if we can just go around, I guess we'll go Hannah and Lisa and then Mark. Introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about, for anyone who doesn't know you, who you are and what you do.
Well, thanks, Annette, for having me, and great to be a part of this group. My name is Hannah Morgan. I am a job search strategist and started a company called Career-Sherpa.net. And so I provide written instruction and every once in a while we'll do in a webinar. I just love talking and helping people understand how job search has changed over the last few years.
Thank you. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Rangel. Thank you so much, Annette, for having me. I run ChameleonResumes.com and JobLandingAcademy.com. I was a recruiter for 13 years before I started Chameleon in 2009. And we primarily work with executives and senior professionals on writing their resumes, their profiles, and then instructing them how to do a job search. And I have Job Landing Academy for to empower all my DIYers who want instruction to do the job search on their own with materials and templates and videos and all the things you need to find out what you got to do to land for a job. So it's just what I love to do. And I'm honored here to be here to continue doing it.
Thank you. And Mark,
Yes.
give us your little bit.
Yeah. Mark Anthony Dyson, the voice of Job Seekers, the blog, the podcast. 2 live stream shows. On Wednesday is Job Seeker Nation, and the one on Friday is the Modern Job Search Checklist, both with co-hosts Jack Kelly and Damian Burkle, respectively. Career writer, talk a lot, write a lot. That's probably the best I can do.
Okay. Well, the reason that I invited the three of you is because you all have sort of your finger on the pulse of the job market and what's going on. So thank you again so much for being here. Please say hello. Put your comments in the chat. We will be able to see it here in the studio and respond to some of your questions. And again, let us know where you are joining us from. So, let's jump right into it. And, as I mentioned to you all, I just have a few talking points, things that we've all been seeing in the news, we've been talking about over this last year. And the first one that, has been like battered in our brains is the Great Resignation, which, started, I believe, in April. I had been, we've been talking about it for months and months. And I was surprised to read in November that 4.4 million people quit their jobs in September alone. So, I mean, it was just, it's kind of mind-boggling. And I looked at a December 2021 article in Politico, and they said that about 4 million people have quit their jobs every month since April. But they're not necessarily just all leaving their jobs, quitting it because they hate, but they're moving to other things. So before I throw it out for discussion, I also want to mention I've recently been seeing it also talked about as the Great Reshuffle. And to my mind, when I read about it, it sounds like people shifting into looking for more sort of purpose, or their work is in their life. And an article that I read in Forbes, I thought put it quite interesting. They said that it was people who are separating the people who work for money at the expense of meaning over those who want meaning over money. So I guess that has been kind of a shift. So let's just, I want to throw the conversation out to you. let's start with you, Hannah. We'll go alphabetically. So Hannah, why don't you start, and then, just pop in Lisa, Mark, to respond.
Yeah. There is a lot. This reshuffling has been really empowering, I think. I think the last couple of years have forced us all to really look at what's important to us. So I am really enthusiastic about the fact that people feel empowered to make a change, to step away from their job. But what scares me, and what has always scared me and will always continue to scare me, are people resigning from a job without having something else first. To me, it's scary because I have seen the mindset and the feeling of hopelessness people who are unemployed have when they're looking for a job. There's something about your own self-esteem which seems to be higher when you have a job. So my hope is that if people do need to have that glory and that power of quitting a job, that they at least begin the process of looking and understanding what the labor market is like in their unique situation and for the kinds of work that they might be looking for before they quit, so that they have just a better sense of the reality and the gravity of what they're doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. I made well, it was not a mistake at the time of, just quitting a job. Okay, I'm not coming back. And I was much younger then, but still, it's a tricky situation, particularly I think as you get older. So what say you, Lisa?
I think having worked primarily, with the executive or senior professional set over the last decade, I mean, leaving a job for quality of life reasons, or to shift from, the moneymaker to the meaning, the job with meaning, or, job with meaning and money, as opposed to just the money. I think that has always been available to the executive senior level set. And, I can't say that while the pandemic has obviously changed the landscape in which people are making changes and how they strategize into a company, into landing a new job. But the reason why they're motivated to do the change, I can't say that that's changed a lot at the executive or senior level, because they've had that available to them, all along. You get to a place of, working to climb the ladder, and then you realize, oh, is this it? I might as well go look for the meaning. It's not what I thought it was. So that, to me, from my little window, hasn't really been a big, reshuffle. But I think what to me is behind the big resignation is that what used to be available to an executive or senior level person is now available to everyone. And now, the nurse is saying, you know what, I'm going to leave because I'm not going to risk my health anymore for a job paying, 70, 80,000 a year. Or the food service worker, at Dunkin' Donuts, or at, the local grocery stores, like, I'm not going to deal with this for $15 an hour anymore. They're realizing they can make that change too for a better quality of life. They can make that change for their health. They can make that change for their family's health or schedule, whatever that may be. And I don't think that was mentally an option for the staff level or middle management level type of worker. And I think now the pandemic has basically been like the great equalizer in that. And that, to me, is where the Great Resignation is really residing. It's in the everyday worker, and not the management set, or not the executive level set, because I don't think the executive level set, not that they haven't been impacted by the pandemic, but I don't think it's been in that way. Because I think they've been making quality of life, looking for the meaningful job change. They've been making those changes for decades.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that too. But Mark, you really keep your finger on the pulse of everything, pretty much even more than anybody I know. And what is your sense? I mean, the idea, is this just, the pandemic where people got a taste of what it was like to have like the free time, and or, what do you think is sort of, jump started this, and do you expect it to continue?
Well, I think all the observations so far that Hannah and Lisa made have been very much valid. The things that have been oncoming for years. Executives they have a completely different view of culture for the most part. But one thing I think that stands out, and one group of people I think that stands out amongst several, that is pretty much the same as far as from what I've seen, is a single mother. The single mother and also all really mothers, really across the board, have seen how they're the ones holding the brunt of the burden of taking care of the kids and having to make a living, and or making the decision to take care of the kids first. That's still troubling without the companies realizing that's really the dough to everything that we do. Is that if that part is not functioning, then it's going to be very hard for America to really function for the long term, because we're not people, and especially working mothers, and especially the higher up the go, they're not going back to our parents' way of living, where the mothers expected to stay home. That's not happening. In fact, more than likely, and have seen fathers during the pandemic be the ones as well to kind of back out and start to mold their work life or their new life around taking care of the kids. So I really think there's a consideration that needs to be made to how this country treats not just the parents, but really, again, the working mothers who really taking on the brunt. As well as we can go race, we could talk about people of color, Black people. I think everybody kind of knows those stats, and I'm not going to try to convince anyone here or in the chat that that's any different. That also carries a burden. If you were a Black working mother, you held quite a bit of the burden of having to decide whether I should go back to work, or what other sacrifices do I need to make to go back to work. As silly as that sounds, but that's the true reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think overall, job search advice keeps changing, and it's going to change per person. I see a lot of, and I'm going to pick on some career coaches and resume writers who paint broad strokes and giving people advice about the situations where it could be applied to anyone, but don't consider what has happened in the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really sad and it's misleading. And I think that's a part of too the confusion that a lot of people face, the people here in the chat even, where they've heard this advice and they've heard to be tied and true, but completely ignore what has happened the past couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So really, people really have to dig in for themselves and dig deep and stop trying to take shortcuts to get a good job when that world doesn't exist anymore. That world has died. And now you'll have to look at yourself and look at and try to think and strategize for yourself. Once they've taken in the advice that those of us on this panel tried to give and try to adjust on a weekly, monthly, and maybe even daily basis as we see things change. But yeah, nurses was mentioned, and teachers particularly are taking a large brunt of this, and that is something that also needs to be considered when you hear it out. I mean, the day of reckoning for education and healthcare is coming. We have not seen the worst of it. And there are some other industries as well that have taken that kind of turn. Someone mentioned hospitality, which has definitely taken a turn. And there's many other industries we haven't even talked about, and probably won't get a chance to talk about. All in all, though, is that people will need to really start to dig in to where they want to go and get it clearer than they ever been before, because things are going to shift even as you change. And it's going to be going to be very important that you keep your finger on the pulse of everything that goes on.
I don't think a lot of people are doing that though, Mark.
No, they're not.
Because they've got their filters and their focus, right? Their focus is their job, and when it's not their job, it's their home life. And so I think we have to make it easier for people who are going to be looking for a job to get good advice, and make it easier for them to understand how to keep their finger on the pulse. Like, what do they do? Like, how does somebody keep their finger on the pulse of the changes going on in education if they're a teacher? Like, you can't be reading union newsletters, because I bet you that's not going to be very helpful about helping people understand the bigger, like, so where does a teacher go to keep their finger on the pulse?
Well, I think one of the things that people have to recognize, and I believe it was in one of Lisa Rangel's newsletters, one of her great newsletters I think I've been a part of for the past 5 years or so. I think she mentioned not that long ago that when you have a job and things are going well, it's a better time to look than when things are terrible. I mean, you think about it, you're much more objective, and you're much more keen to what's going to work for you with your life and with where you want to go when things are going well. Most people wait till things start to bottom out until it's time to
Yeah.
job search, and then they're in a mode where they cannot be rational,
Yeah.
because unfortunately job search is almost as much emotional than it is tactical. So people tend to rely on the emotional first. And when you bottom out of a job, you also bottom out emotionally, you've bottomed out thoughtfully. So you really can't apply. But I think people need to realize, if I've always said, you guys heard me say it dozens of times, that job search truly is a lifestyle. Like, you can't wait for things to go to the worst part for you to rationally start to make some strategies and make some decisions about your life. But how long people will for them to take for them to do it, I'm not sure. I think we've all resounded that kind of message in one way or another from different angles in some sort. But waiting is really the death of
Yeah.
your future.
I think you're 100% right. Thank you for, you're referencing, my emails, but it's not my thought, right? I mean, I can't say that I'm the one who came up with that idea, but it's really a promotion of sort of a universal message that I think has been told but ignored for decades, right? Is to It's like a relationship, right? If you ignore a relationship or you take it for granted, it's only a matter of time before it doesn't serve you anymore. And your
Right.
job essentially is that, right? And if you're focused on, the activities for your family, if you're focused on your career, and you're focused on, in terms of the activities you do for your, in your career, and you're focused on your home, or whatever it is that you do, all because of your job's income, but you're not focused on the things to retain the income or preserve the income, your attention is on the wrong thing. And so if we maintain our houses, we maintain our appearances, right? The money we invest in appearances, we invest in our health, we invest in things and that make us feel better. But the thing that fuels all of that, right, our income, essentially, we don't, as humans, look at that to try to retain and preserve that. And that's what we all need to do as a collective people, is like the attention we place in all of our other areas of life, we really need to place on our sources of income, right? Whether it's a business, whether it's a job, whether, whatever it is. But if we don't work at maintaining that, that's where we get in trouble. And I think that's what a lot of people saw the last couple of years,
We get lulled into complacency also.
Yeah.
And there's this weird belief that I've been with this company 20 years. They'll take care of me. It's family,
Yeah.
right? So there are a lot of strange beliefs that are carrying over.
Right.
So I think you're so on point, Lisa and Mark.
Yeah, it sounds like the theme, and I have heard for years that you have to kind of always be networking. But I feel like you kind of have to always be looking, in a way, always be open, always be ready to make that next move, and to keep your eye on what's out there. It seems it seems to be that way, but I run into people all the time, and I know you do as well, who, they're suddenly out of work and they don't know what to do because they have no plan. And I don't know anyone since my dad who's worked in a job their whole life and had their company sort of take care of them. It's just not like that today. So, before we move on, do you see this whole reshuffle continuing? And for how long, kind of?
I think it's going to continue. I think people are willing to push. Once people see a break in the industry, pushing a little bit harder. The restaurant industry, hospitality industry, is seeing that right now. I mean, you would have thought that people said, okay, we're going to raise it $1 an hour to two. We're going to raise it $2 more an hour, and we're going to give you a few more benefits. People did not return to those jobs still, and it seems like all the people who treated, and this is one observation, not the sole observation, but the restaurants and the companies that treated people badly, you can almost tell by the scarcity of their workers.
Yep.
That says a lot now. There's no way to hide that, because you need people to run that business and you need people to serve other people. And you don't have that, and people are beginning to ask questions. I mean, and I saw that big with one of the restaurants my wife and I loved going to, loved sitting down eating. We loved their special shrimp. It was great. It was awesome, but they closed. They closed, and people did not return. And you could only assume, if you know a little bit about the news, that, oh, they really treated their workers really badly. And we even see certain restaurants that never had signs or advertised before for jobs have it on the outside of the shop. That's not particularly the place to put it, but we can argue that. But unfortunately, that's where people are.
Yeah, I've heard that myself. I have a friend in hospitality, and she says that they're just really struggling to find people to come in and take those jobs. And I see stories on the news all the time where, there just aren't enough people that are wanting to take those positions. So one of the other things that, we've been hearing about is the whole idea of the remote working and the hybrid workplaces. And, I mean, remote working seemed to me to be on the rise before the pandemic. And then, of course, pandemic, everybody's working from home. And so, it kind of proved that people could be productive. But, now I was reading something in the JobVite Recruiter Nation. We all know JobVite, they do that every other year, and they do the Job Seeker Nation as well. And one of the things they said was 70% of organizations will have a hybrid in office and remote option kind of going forward. And that's good news, although I've had some recruiters tell me that ain't happening. So we'll have to talk about that. But another thing is the idea of having that flexibility of working from home, and people love that. They like to be able, I believe we all work from our home offices, and it's great. You can take a break and run out and do something during the day, and people enjoy that. But I also have heard a friend of mine who started a new job and found that, being new at a company, or if you're an earlier careerist, that kind of may have a negative impact, on your career, on your participation in the job, and how people see you. And the last thing I want to mention before I ask your thoughts on this is, I was reading in a post by the World Economic Forum, excuse me if I read this, and they were talking about some statistics from an ADP research report, on-site, remote, or hybrid, employee sentiments on that. And 70% of the on-site employees responded that they felt a very strong connection to their teammates, whereas only 64% of the remote workers felt that same connection. So I can certainly see, how that can happen. But let's start with you, Mark. What do you what's your whole take on that whole hybrid remote? Is it going to stay, and is it good or bad or mixed?
The smarter employers have at least tried the hybrid model, and I think the hybrid is kind of the way to go. And to consider, if you have a large group and half that want to work from home and half that don't, and some people are making decisions solely on whether they can work from home or not. So that to give people an option wherever, whenever you can, is a very good thing. Despite your feelings about having the old office format. And that's one of the shows I binged during the holiday season was The Office. I probably watched 40 or 50 of those episodes like I never did before. But I think one of the things that I get from that, and the character that is kind of the liked and most least liked, that's the one thing he only says is that it's about people, and ultimately the office and what we do and everything we do, whether it's in person or away, it's going to be about people. How much a company's willing to put their bet on people really is going to be very interesting to see coming up here. But the hybrid model, I definitely think more companies can do it than they claim, because really one of the things that also showed up during the pandemic, that companies were liars, because they told a lot of people they told people they couldn't do it, they couldn't possibly do it. Then when everything shut down, oh, we can work from home now. It's like, really? So I think, I mean, people, it's that elementary. So really, when you get that and honest to it, it's an opportunity for companies to kind of get on the right track.
Yeah.
And some may even have to start over, but that's the way I look at it.
I agree. I mean, I think the Monday through Friday 9 to 5 model is archaic at best, and I don't think it's worked for a long time. But we're resistant to change as a human race, and look, when that model came about, it was, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have email, we didn't have devices that brought work at home. People were able to leave work at 5 and get home and be with their families and hang out. And short of them bringing paperwork home in a briefcase, most people left work at home. Kids left school at school. And now with 24/7 accessibility, availability, people need a break. And to say you need to work these 8 hours knowing they're still doing stuff at home. Some people are more productive at 7 a.m. outside of that hour. Some people are more productive at 11 p.m. I think it's more inclusive to have a flexible model, and it allows people of all different types of home scenarios, work productivity tendencies. If you have international companies, people doing, calls between California and, Belgium, somebody's going to be outside of that 9 to 5 model wherever they are. Right. So like there needs to be flexibility where people can manage their life, their sleep, their family balances, all of that. It's not conducive anymore. And I think the pandemic just basically ripped that Band-Aid off. It's probably one of the only good things, about it. It was overdue. And so the companies that accept that fact are going to attract the best talent, because the best talent is typically not working 9 to 5. They know their work product. They know their tendencies to work. They know when they're most productive. They know how to manage their time best, and they want the flexibility to do that and not just do FaceTime type of things. So I agree with Mark. It's it's more successful. I know you had mentioned a question about Marty had a question. Did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to let Hannah.
Oh,
share
Hannah,
her
sorry.
thoughts
Yes,
on
yes.
this.
Sorry.
No,
No,
that's
that's okay.
Sorry, I'm like boss lady all the time.
And then we have a few questions in the chat. So Hannah, you want to just share your thoughts on this, and we have a few questions from our people out there in our audience.
So Here's the thing. I absolutely, Mark and Lisa, absolutely agree with you guys. It is long overdue. Thank goodness that the pandemic really forced us into this situation. And here's the thing, we're still trying to figure it out. So those companies that are saying, it's not working for us, or the employees that are saying, I'm feeling left out, we have to be a little bit more generous, because no company has had to do this before. I mean, there are companies who actually have always been virtual or have always sort of worked asynchronously, and they've been ahead of this. But for the majority of us, this is all new. We're figuring it out as we go along. Yes, you're going to feel lonely. Yes, you're going to probably have to work harder if you're working in a hybrid situation to make sure your manager knows what you're working on. As we learn and go through this together, I think that there's going to be some great improvements, but we could already look to some of the companies that are doing it well. So if you are interested in joining a company that has already figured out hybrid and asynchronous working and is okay with that, then go target those companies, because they have a more advanced, sophisticated culture around this process. And I love listening to Lars Schmidt's interviews, Amplify Talent, because he's been focusing for the past year on companies that do hybrid well, that do remote well, and he invites guests in to talk about, from their HR experience, how they make it work. Like, it's been fascinating. So there are companies that are doing it, but by and large, the rest of them are trying to figure it out.
Well, thank you so much for mentioning that, because I think that's something that, we all tell the clients that we work with: create a list of your target employers, and then, network your way in there and focus on the employers that, are speaking to you in some way or another. We have several questions in the chat, so I just want to start. Marty asked, is now a good time to totally switch? I'm assuming this is careers, or is it better to be aligned with what you have done before? Recruiters will say one thing. What do you say about the switchers?
I think now's a great time to switch, only because there is employers are having a hard time finding people. All right. So I think that they're going to be a little bit more lenient in their requirements. They are being forced to sort of be more open about keeping a bigger, broader mind about what they're looking for, and maybe be willing to be more flexible. So for those people that are switchers, as long as you've done your research and you're well prepared, and you understand the hurdles that are in front of you, I think now would actually be a pretty good time.
I think it comes down to just telling the story. I don't mean to sound oversimplified in that way, but no matter how varied your background is, it's how do you weave it all together to say, like, this is why this would benefit you, to bring somebody on that has this varied experience. There's always a pro and con to every path. And, looking for a job as a career changer, your job is to accentuate the pros of why these different varied experiences will give a certain perspective that maybe somebody who went the linear path within the industry or the profession is not going to bring. So, what's that story behind it? What's the motivation? What was the things that drew you to this type of scenario? What are the transferable skills that you have that they were not going to have to ramp you up on, that you come with naturally or intuitively? It's about telling the story, and I think that's what it comes down to. And I mean, every time is a good time, right? I mean, I don't know. I just, like, if you look at stories and economic reports and the job reports, I mean, that can sometimes really be misleading and cloudy, because the bottom line is you need one job, and you need to tell the story a certain way to the target audience that you need to talk to, and land that one job. It doesn't matter whether it's a high period of the economy, a low period of the economy in a general sense, or any of that, because you're one, like, small little microcosm in these multiple these multiple grand schemes. And you can, one person can make the difference that maybe a report would reflect otherwise. And I think it's important to just put all that noise out and look at who is your target audience, what do they need to hear, what do you have that is in line with that, and then just tell the story. And that's the person who tells the story, all things being equal, the person who tells the story most vulnerably and most diplomatically, I think, wins.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark. You look like you weren't ready to say something.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of people tend to even simplify it even more and saying is to perception and playing to the perception of what you want people to think of you as. Ultimately, we're talking about being able to meet the needs of what you have currently. But I think a lot of times people, because they lack the judgment to create a story that makes sense for them and the company, that they either oversimplify it or they underestimate how hard it could be in carrying that journey. So if you're always making changes, if you're always developing and things like that, you're going to be able to adjust more frequently and as much as you need to make it to the next step. If you're always putting it off to the last moments, I'm afraid you're always going to be light years behind because you're still trying to figure it out at the worst moment, and you may not have the emotional bandwidth or capacity to be able to make that change at that worst moment. That's why it's always, and like I said, to begin with, when things are great, you have the most clarity, and you can get the most clarity. And you may not know exactly what it may look like a year or two from then, but at least you know that you're not going to be in that place forever. And that sometimes is the best start, even though you may be great at that job and everything about the job is great. So people really think they spend too little time trying to think about they think about what's the most immediate, and sometimes that's not always the best way to start a job search or a career change.
So before we move on, because our good friend Dawn is there in the audience and she has a question, but before we move on to that, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the whole, candidates market. We've been hearing, that's the candidates market. And I think, Mark, you and I discussed this in another group not long ago,
Mm-hmm.
kind of what is this candidates market? And, it was obviously, during the pandemic, there were not a lot of jobs out there. And people were, even if they hated their job, they were kind of hunkering down and waiting to see what was going to happen. And then as things started, turning around and the economy, boosted and there were more jobs available, I've worked with clients, I'm sure you have too, Lisa, who are now becoming active job seekers because they are, they see things are picking up. And so now, although there are more jobs, there are more candidates in the market. So, what is this whole candidates market? I mean, what is the benefit? Is, people think it's easy to find a job. My thought is not so much. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it comes back to a particular person's situation. I think if someone, is like a staff level person, I think honestly the opportunities can abound, but it also depends on how you're putting yourself together and how you're appealing to those hiring managers. I think as you start getting higher up the food chain in a company hierarchy, there's just fewer positions available at that level. So, but the candidates haven't diminished in any way, so it's going to just be more competitive despite what the headlines may say, right? So I think it depends on what you're going for, and it depends on it comes back to making an assessment to what you want in something, and then where is that position going to be found, and then putting your your wins, your transferable skills, all that stuff, like in an alignment that can then be attractive to that person hiring for that position, that's going to have all the things, all the bells and whistles that you want. But it's I think that's the key. It's like I don't know, I've always been a person who, ethically, of course, like, there's chaos, there's opportunity in chaos. And, there's always going to be chaos, whether it's because of abundance or whether it's because of loss. There's always chaos in some way. And the key is just to kind of look at it and say, okay, where's the opportunity lie for me here? And I think if you can develop that sense or that skill set for yourself and do it in a proactive manner, like Mark mentioned. You know, if you're doing it constantly at the last minute, you've lost the advantage of strategy, right? It's like the Dory Clark book, The Long Game, right? Like, I mean, it's, you gotta, if you're at least doing things in a prepared manner, you at least have some things already going for you that you're able to pivot quickly because you have some things already as a foundation. But if you don't have things prepared, I'm not necessarily talking about the tangible resume. I just mean like thinking about your path, where you want to be, what are some goals you have for yourself. They may change, but it's better to have goals that you're working towards that change than no goals at all, because then you're kind of aimless, you know? And I don't know. I just think that, you know, I don't know, it's like the freedom spectrum, right? Like the more we plan, you know, we sometimes don't like being restricted by planning activities and discipline of doing things, but then we like the freedom of what happens as a result of those discipline and planning activities. But if we take the freedom first without the discipline and the planning, we're going to probably be restricted later on, you know, so in life. So it just depends, right? So do you want your freedom now or do you want your freedom later? And typically, if you want your freedom later, it means you got to do some planning and some proactive work and some disciplinary type activities now. But if you take your freedom now, most likely you'll have options limited to you later on, and then you're going to be restricted later on. So it's, I don't know. It's really sort of trying to tell my kids. They're not listening, but.
You know, I love what you said about, you know, the jobs getting fewer, because people always think about climbing that career ladder, and you're really climbing the career pyramid where, you know, the higher you get, the fewer the jobs. So it's,
yeah, there's only one CFO job, right?
Yeah,
In almost
exactly.
every company. I mean, even if you have divisions, there's still one CFO job for each product line or each division, like, and where there's, you know, 9 staff accountants. So it may have been easier for you to get the staff accountant job, but you got to now come to the table with a different A game, not an A game, because you still had to come with your A game to get the staff accountant job, but you got to now come with a different A game to get the CFO job. And it's still competitive because there's just one,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And any other thoughts before we move on to Dawn's question? Nope.
You know, I actually just had one thought, something you said earlier. I think I can't remember if it was Hannah or Mark, but about the remote work, you know, about people not grasping or not feeling like they belong to the culture right away. And I think, you know, we want the flexibility, right? But then that comes with a trade-off. We have to be more active in our relationship building. And they're not just going to happen because we're sitting in a coffee room or we're sitting in a conference. And then there's that time after leaving the conference where you might just hook up with somebody to chat. Like, so, you know, what's that saying? Like, with great power comes great responsibility. It's like, if we want all these perks, the downside to them is it maybe has less, you know, impromptu conversations. So then we really got to take the steps to and teach those coming into the workforce, to teach them to make appointments to just
Yeah.
have conversations with people. So like, again, like if we're going to take all these great perks, they do come with a trade-off, but now we have to work in a different way to take great responsibility to get these perks.
And
Right.
some companies are really good at
At that,
assigning
yes.
mentors and
Exactly.
providing tools to make that stuff happen. So
And
again,
it is intuitive for some people, the same
Right.
way it's intuitive for somebody to strike up a conversation right at, you know, impromptu at the end of a conference. So some people after the conference is over just skate out of there because they don't want to talk to anybody. So everybody's different, right? It's going to just come with a different set of skills that now people have to realize have to happen.
Well, the companies that were always good at it, that's good because they, you know, they put people before motives very more likely than not. And those who become bad at it, now they're bad. So really, it's a matter of who's always been good at it. And, you know, if you're terrible at it, it's going to show up in the worst
The
way.
light is shown no matter what it is.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
right. The light shines where there's darkness.
That's
And
it, right?
sure
Right.
enough, you know, you're exposed. So, but yet the whole time people was calling that family. And that's
Right.
where the sour taste begins, is that this wasn't at all what you said it was.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
much worse than what
Let's
you
face
said
it,
it
family's
was.
not the same meaning for everybody. So
That's right too. That's right
Well,
too.
you know, yeah, but you gotta resemble everybody gets a warm feeling. So, oh, so they're family. But that's something else people have to be smart into and ask the right questions to really see if they're really family or not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Point
I
taken.
kind of derailed things there, Annette. I'm sorry.
no,
But
no, that's perfectly fine. It sounds like the whole thing about it is being intentional. And even if you're in the office, you still have to be intentional about it. It's
right.
not,
It's perfectly stated.
and
Yes.
people just
Yeah.
just let things go. So Dawn's question, thank you for hopefully you're still there listening to us, Dawn. She wants to know, what do you think about CEOs reevaluating the disparity in their pay levels versus that of their employees? Why don't the CEOs realize that their employee retention is directly tied into how employees are treated and compensated? Okay, big question there. Who wants
Ooh,
to jump on that?
I don't know.
that's a
Might be above my pay
juicy
grade. I
one.
don't know.
There's some big changes that we have to see, that we really would love to see. We don't have that authority, but how cool would it be if a CEO's salary bonus was tied to employee retention, right? Like that's a whole new game.
Well, it could be tied to a whole lot more than just the retentive part. I mean, really, if we're talking about, and I think one of the things, I don't know how much we're going to be able to dig into diversity and inclusion, but definitely that tells a part of the story that's, that shows that they're doing more than just trying to fill a seat, that they're actually being intentional and really thinking about the team and thinking about the best for their company culture ultimately. Um, so I think, but in answering the question a little bit more directly, I don't know if CEOs are, unless you get one that's progressive and say, I'll just, I'll be Lee Iacocca of the 2020s. More than likely, that's not going to happen unless you're Dan Price, of course, where you raise everybody up to 70,000. And I think that showed that not everybody has to have the CEO's pay. That's not what people are ultimately saying. It is mostly people who are seeing the disparity and between their peers and their colleagues, and how somebody can make 15,000 more for the same job,
Well,
and
let's talk
why do
about
they?
that, because that's the cool part that's happening right
That's
now
really
in New York City
well,
and New York.
but right, as far as the job, you're talking about the job ads and saying that this is the salary of the job. But what's a more interesting conversation are the people who have no skin in the game at all, who fight that very notion that salaries should be advertised. There are people who have no skin in the game as far as being in management or being a CEO, who are against having that, just because that it really breaks the pyramid scheme, so to speak, of having the CEO and everybody else down make more money. So, just like when the whole better.com thing blew up, there are people who were actually cheering on the CEO and said that's what those 900 employees get. And I find that an even more interesting discussion
Oh my goodness.
than having closing the gap between the CEO, and because that's kind of asking them to say, hey, I'm going to give up a year's salary, but that's not what people are saying. What are people really saying when they look at that disparity? I think that's ultimately the question that needs to be answered, and I think everybody has to have some kind of say in.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Now, Paul had asked about building relationships when you're in that hybrid work work situation, but I feel like we've already spent quite a bit of time talking about that. Being intentional about building those relationships, whether you're in the office or not in the office, and to just really focus on that. So one of the things that another topic that I wanted to get into, and we still have some time, is to talk about diversity and inclusion. And another thing I read in the JobVite Recruiter Nation said that 49% of recruiters were saying that job seekers are now asking about diversity and inclusion initiatives in the companies that they're interviewing for, that they're, they're really, they want to know what the companies are doing. And one thing I thought was really, really interesting, I was looking at Korn Ferry's Future of Work Trends 2022, and they put that research shows that diverse and inclusive teams are better at solving complex problems, more innovative, make better decisions 87% of the time. Now, I mean, that's not surprising to me, because we all know the idea of, you have that group think. If everybody's the same, then the ideas are going to be the same. And it's really just not, not a good thing for any business to have everybody thinking the same thing. But I also read that a lot of the companies, though, are still thinking of diversity and inclusion as a risk rather than an opportunity, and putting things like anti-bullying in place, um, and non-discrimination policies in place, rather than, seeing it as an opportunity. And so what are your thoughts about, how companies are going to be, working at this in the future, ways that maybe they can embrace it, and if you think they will in fact do that? And Mark, since you brought that topic up, why don't you give us your thoughts on that?
I'll try to make it brief. When leaders are not leading in the area, any of those initiatives, they die out. And we could take it one of two ways. We could take a way of saying, well, the leader's definitely not interested in it, but they're just trying to appease people and perhaps do it for the time being, saying that we tried, or that they really do care and they're willing to put skin in the game. And when they personally put skin in the game, keep people accountable, but mostly are out there in front doing it, then that's when it lasts. Any other strategy, any other positioning other than that, it just doesn't work. It's the same. It's an uphill battle. But when the leaders do it, and maybe not all, but if you get some that will lead, definitely it trickles down that kind of way, because they're setting the example for people. And also, maybe to a certain degree, weeding out the people who really have no intention of following through. So they see the leader doing it, I say, and the person who doesn't want it saying, I'll go to this company over here where they don't care anything about it. So that's where I kind of sit.
I think you mentioned, it kind of goes in line with what, I mean, everybody's mentioned, but you mentioned the word intentional, Annette. I think it's acknowledging that, at least for me, right, what I've done over the last few years is really do an assessment of, like, where do I always get resources? And, I go for a while, yeah, in the maybe early 2000s, late 2010 or early 2010s, I was going maybe intuitively and unconsciously to the same resources. And it wasn't bringing, in hindsight, it wasn't bringing diverse, vendors, clients, staff, and it was a wake up call to then say, okay, you know what? I'm going to go to different resources. I'm going to look for different people than me, and it can sometimes be as simple as, like, at least in our space, like, if you're putting up a social media post and you're tagging people for opinions, like, is everybody the same? Does everybody look like you? Or are you seeking out people who have different perspectives and don't look like you? And, the vendors that you use, does everyone look like you? Or are you looking at other vendors? Are you tapping other resources? Are companies tapping other colleges other than the top 10? Do they really need the top 10? And I say that as a Cornell University graduate, and I love my alma mater and I think it's amazing, but is it the best resource every time somebody needs to recruit? No, you maybe need to go to some other schools that were available to certain populations based on the constructs. And we don't have to get into all that necessarily, but, like, go find talent everywhere and challenge yourself. Still hold the same standards of the work needing to be done and the skills to be had, but that doesn't exist in just, like, top 10 lists of anything. It really exists everywhere. And I think that's the key is everyone has to look inside themselves and be intentional to do the extra work, to look for speakers, look for, amplifiers of message that are different than what we each look like. And that's when you start to get a diversity of opinion.
I think it's wonderful. It's been a priority according to JobBite for a while. It didn't just start at the pandemic. It actually was trending high for a while. I think businesses understand that having diversity and inclusion as part of who they are is going to help them. I think it's sort of like remote work. They're not sure how to make it work for them. Maybe they're over complicating it. Maybe they really don't believe it. Maybe they've tried some initiatives and they didn't work. So I'm of the belief that it takes time to make some of these initiatives work. No, it doesn't take any time to find a non-top 10 school, but it takes time to get that, to change our thinking and to believe that. So I'd like to believe that, we'll see some more of this happening. I think baby steps have started to happen. At least we've created a greater sense of awareness of its importance and significance, but I think it takes time. And I think either people lose interest in the topic and move on to something else, or it doesn't work the way they wanted it to, and so it gets dropped. I think there are lots of reasons why it isn't as mainstream I know employees are asking about it during the process, but I think there are reasons why companies, not all companies, but some companies aren't embracing it as much as others.
Yeah, excellence exists everywhere. It's not always in the same spots, and we just have to look for it elsewhere. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. And you made a great point, Lisa, about companies, especially the large ones, where you get to choose where you want to seek talent. I mean, there's a lot of Black colleges and Hispanic colleges and different programs where they would love to have and host and for companies to come be a part of the conversation. And we're not just talking about just coming to the job fair, which is antiquated in some ways, and just scout. We're talking about having conversations and finding out, okay, or if there are some holes in the learning part, where are there? Or if there's some surpluses, this might be the spot to fill some needs right away. And even to some degree, there are a few that are actually doing it, that not just waiting to start in the senior year of college, but they'll start to capturing attention the junior, senior year. Some of these high schools in the inner cities from high school, the junior and senior years, and start to appeal to them. I mean, really, the earlier and more intentional, further thought you think, to strategize and to make those things happen, the better you'll look in 10 years. And then, yeah, we really made difference because we thought about with the future in mind, as opposed to doing it to meet the quota and to quell the criticism.
Yeah, so that goes back to the planning, right? Starting and starting now and moving forward. So, we're kind of at the end of our time here, but I just would like to and thank you so many people out there who have been with us this entire time. And thank you to everyone who's watching us on the replay. So, is there something that you think that maybe we should have touched on, or something that you'd like to share before you kind of wind this down? I think we have, we can hang a little bit longer.
Take responsibility for your own future, no matter what.
Okay.
Yeah, it's time to start to look at things. We think about career trajectory a little bit differently than we had in the past. We think about this job, we're thinking about what position we want in the next 5 years, when that position really that you might be best suited for doesn't exist quite yet. And understand how fast this changes very quickly. So you'll have to think about, okay, what skills will have the most value and how can I build on top of those, even though you may not even using them yet currently, um, so that you can be relevant when it is that time, when you know is that time, and to find out, um, the marketplace value, you have to start now.
Okay.
Build it before you
Bingo.
need it.
Amen.
Yeah, amen to that is right. I'm so glad listening to you all. I think intentional is going to be my word for 2022, and I'm going to use that. So thank you so much for being here. I am so grateful that you all said yes when I asked you, and I hope that you'll come back and we can do this again and we'll just cover some other topics. So thanks so much. And thank you to everyone who's been out there with us, everyone watching on the replay, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you.